"Dad, the car broke down. Ben is sick. I need help," my daughter cried over the phone. I gave her my emergency credit card number without a second thought. Hours later, alerts flooded my phone. Not from a mechanic, but from Gucci, Chanel, 5-star restaurants. She thought she had played me for a fool. So I called the bank and changed the PIN. I changed it to the one date in history she has spent her entire life trying to forget. The lesson was about to begin. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The date. It wasn't just a random set of numbers. It wasn't a birthday or an anniversary. It was a scar, a timestamp etched directly onto the soul of our family, a day of such profound loss and failure that Jessica, my daughter, had spent the last 15 years of her life trying to bury it under a mountain of expensive distractions. And I, in my misguided love, had let her. I had paid for the mountain. To understand the quiet cruelty of my revenge, you must first understand the man I was. For 35 years, I was a firefighter. My life was governed by a simple, brutal calculus of risk and responsibility. I lived by a code of preparedness. You check your equipment, you trust your team, and you always have a backup plan. You learn that in a crisis, panic is the enemy, and a clear head is the only tool that can save you. My life was about running into the fires that others ran away from. That emergency credit card was born from one of those fires. It was a 5-alarm blaze in a downtown warehouse, an old brick tinderbox. I was on the 3rd floor with my crew when the roof gave way. I remember a roar, a flash of orange, and then a crushing, absolute darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed, my body a roadmap of fractures and burns, but I was alive. I was one of the lucky ones. My wife, Mary, sat by my bedside for weeks. Her hand in mine was my only anchor in a sea of pain. It was during those long, quiet nights in the hospital that the idea of the card was born. "We were so close to losing you, Tom," she had whispered, her voice trembling. What if I hadn't been able to get to the bank? What if the insurance papers were lost? We need a fail-safe. Something for a true life-or-death moment. So we created it. The emergency fund. It wasn't just a credit card. It was a symbol, a financial lifeline with a high limit, kept pristine and untouched, its sole purpose for a day we prayed would never come again. A day of fire, of sirens, of a life hanging in the balance. When Mary passed away a few years later, that card, and the promise behind it, became a sacred trust between me and our daughter, Jessica. I had tried to raise her with the values Mary and I shared: honesty, gratitude, and a healthy respect for the difference between what you want and what you need. For a time, it seemed to work. She was a good kid, bright and full of life. But after Mary was gone, something changed. A void opened up in Jessica's life, and she began to fill it not with memories or love, but with things. It started small. A new pair of shoes she couldn't afford. A weekend trip with friends she lied about each time I would sit her down. "Jess, your mother and I, we worked hard for everything we had," I would try to explain. "Money is a tool, not a goal. It's meant to build a life, not just to buy things." "I know, Dad," she would say, her eyes downcast, her voice a perfect imitation of remorse. All my friends have these things. I don't want to be the odd one out. And I, a father grieving my wife and terrified of losing my daughter, would always give in. I mistook her materialism for insecurity, her greed for a cry for help. I paid her debts. I co-signed her first car loan. I helped with the rent on an apartment that was always just a little beyond her means. I became her enabler, her constant, reliable safety net. My love for her became a blank check, and she never hesitated to cash it. I had, of course, told her about the emergency card. I explained its sacred origin, its singular purpose. "This is not for shopping, Jess," I had told her, my voice as serious as I had ever used with her. "This is not for a vacation. This is for the day the roof collapses. This is for the day you are standing on the side of the road with your child and you have no other way to get to safety. Do you understand?" "I understand, Dad," she had said, looking me straight in the eye. I would never abuse that trust. The final terrible irony is that the day she needed it most, the day of the real fire, she wasn't there. It was the day my wife, her mother, was in a car accident. It was sudden, brutal. She was rushed to the hospital and the doctors called me with the grim news. She was critical. I called Jessica, my voice frantic, telling her to get to the hospital immediately. She was a teenager then, 17. "I can't, Dad," she had said, her voice sounding distant, distracted. "I have a huge history final to study for. I'm at the library with my study group. I'll be there as soon as I can." Mary passed away 3 hours later, holding my hand, her last whispered word my name. Jessica never made it. I sat by her bedside for another hour, lost in a fog of disbelief, before I finally drove home to an empty house. As I walked into her room, I saw it. Lying on her bed, a collection of shopping bags from the city's most expensive mall. A new dress, new shoes, a new purse. She hadn't been at the library. She had been shopping. She had lied. And she had chosen. A new handbag over her mother's final moments. We never spoke of that day. The lie she told, the truth I discovered. It became a silent, unhealed wound between us, a ghost that haunted every interaction. I think, in my grief, I was a coward. Confronting her would have meant confronting the terrifying truth that the daughter Mary and I had raised was capable of such profound selfishness. So I buried the truth, and I allowed her to bury her guilt under a fresh layer of denial. Life went on, but it was never the same. Jessica grew into a woman who was a stranger to me. She moved to the city, got a job in marketing, and built a life. That was a perfect, glossy facade curated for social media. She married a man who was her mirror image, charming on the surface, but with a hollowness at his core that I recognized instantly. They had a son, Ben, a wonderful, bright little boy who became the new, innocent focus of my love. But I watched with a growing sense of dread as they began to raise him in the same culture of materialism that had consumed his mother. My role in her life was reduced to a simple, predictable function. I was the bank of Dad. The calls would always start the same way, with a performance of daughterly affection. "Daddy? Hi. How are you? I was just thinking about you." This was always the prelude. I learned to brace myself for what came next. It would be a story, always a story, a perfectly constructed narrative of unforeseen circumstances and temporary setbacks. "You won't believe what happened," she'd say, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The landlord just raised the rent without any warning. We're in a bit of a tight spot this month. Could you possibly just help us out until my commission check comes in?" Or it would be about Ben. This was her most effective weapon. "Dad, Ben's school is having a special trip to the Science Museum, but it's so expensive. I would hate for him to be the only one left out because we're a little short. And I, the retired firefighter, the man trained to run towards emergencies, could never resist the siren call of my grandson's well-being. I always paid. I knew on some level that the stories were probably lies. The rent increase likely paid for a weekend getaway. The school trip probably funded a new designer dress. But to refuse would have meant risking her cutting me off. From Ben, a price I was unwilling to pay. So I continued my silent enablement, my love for my grandson held hostage by my daughter's insatiable greed. The conversation about the emergency card, the one I had established with her mother, happened only once more after Mary's death. It was about 5 years ago. "Dad," she had said during one of her rare visits, "I was just thinking, That emergency card. The PIN is still the same, right? Just in case. The PIN is the same, Jessica, I had replied, my voice level, watching her closely. And so is the reason for its existence. It is for a day of fire and sirens, nothing less. Of course, she had said a little too quickly. I would never dream of using it for anything else. It was a lie, and we both knew it, but we maintained the fiction. It was the foundation of our fragile, transactional relationship, and that brings us to last Tuesday, the final, most audacious performance of her life. My phone rang, and the moment I heard her voice, I knew this was different. The panic was not feigned, it was pitch perfect. "Dad, oh, thank God you picked up!" she cried, her voice a frantic, breathless gasp. "We're in so much trouble. We were driving to see a client upstate, and the car, it just died. We're on the side of the highway, in the middle of nowhere. Are you all right? Is Ben with you?" I asked, my own heart rate quickening. "Yes, and he's burning up. He has a fever, a bad one. I think he needs to go to the hospital. The tow truck driver says the repairs will be at least $2,000. And Dad, I left my wallet at home in the rush. I have nothing. We're stranded." It was the perfect storm of a story. The broken down car, the sick child, the remote. Location, it hit every single one of my protective instincts. It was, in every sense of the word, the very definition of an emergency. The kind the card was made for. "Okay, sweetheart. Calm down," I said, my voice the steady, reassuring tone of a first responder. "I have the card right here. Get a pen. I'll give you the numbers." I read them out to her, the 16 digits, the expiration date, the 3 numbers on the back. And then I gave her the PIN. The old PIN. The one that had been a silent testament to my trust for over a decade. "Oh, Dad, thank you," she sobbed, her voice thick with what I believed was genuine relief. "You're a lifesaver. I'll pay you back every penny, I swear." I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, my heart still pounding but with a sense of relief. I had done the right thing. My fail-safe, the system Mary and I had designed, had worked. I had been able to help my family in their moment of greatest need. The first notification from the bank arrived on my phone about an hour later. A charge from Gucci Soho Boutique, $7,800. I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. It had to be a mistake, a fraud alert. Then the next one came. Le Bernardin Restaurant, $1,250. Then another. The Plaza Hotel Spa, $2,500, and another, and another. They came in a flood, a digital tsunami of luxury and deceit, each notification a separate, distinct act of betrayal. There was no broken-down car. There was no sick child. There was only a shopping spree, a victory lap, funded by the purest lie she had ever told. She hadn't just used the card. She had plundered it. She had taken a symbol of my life's work, of my promise to her mother, a symbol of life and death, and she had used it to buy herself a new handbag and a champagne lunch. I sat there in the silent kitchen, the notifications continuing to light up my phone screen, each one a small digital insult. The initial shock, the wave of white-hot rage and gut-wrenching pain washed over me. And then, it was gone. It was replaced by something else, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was the calm, cold clarity that comes in the heart of a 5-alarm fire. In a crisis, a firefighter doesn't have the luxury of emotion. You don't panic. You don't grieve. You assess the situation, you identify the threat, and you act. You follow your training. And my entire life had been a training exercise for this very moment. The threat was not the $20,000 she had stolen. The money was irrelevant. The threat was the lie, the rot, the deep fundamental disrespect for everything my wife and I had stood for. For years, I had been trying to fight this fire with love, with forgiveness, with second chances. And all I had done was feed the flames. It was time for a new strategy. It was time to cut off the oxygen. I did not call Jessica. I did not scream, or shout, or demand an explanation. To do so would have been to give her what she wanted, a drama, a confrontation, another opportunity to cry and lie and manipulate her way back into my forgiveness. No. This would be a quiet, clean, and professional operation. My first call was to the bank. I navigated the automated menu with a steady hand and was connected to the fraud department. "Sterling National Bank, how can I help you?" a polite, professional voice asked. "My name is Thomas," I said, my voice calm and even. "I am the primary holder of the emergency platinum card ending in 4242. I am reporting a series of fraudulent charges." "I see the charges, sir," the agent said. "They are quite substantial." "Was the card lost or stolen?" "No," I replied, a cold, hard truth in my voice. "It was used by a person who is no longer authorized to access this account. I need you to do two things for me immediately. First, you will decline any and all further transactions. Second, you will change the 4-digit personal identification number, effective immediately." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "I can do that for you right now, sir. What would you like the new PIN to be?" This was the moment, the culmination of 15 years of buried pain, the quiet, final judgment. I looked at the small calendar hanging on my kitchen wall, the one with a picture of a lighthouse, a beacon of safety. I looked at today's date, and then I looked back, 15 years into the past, to the day that had defined the rest of our lives. The day of the fire, the day of the hospital, the day of the shopping bags, the day Mary died. "The new PIN," I said, my voice as cold and steady as a surgeon's scalpel, "will be 1023, October 23rd. 1023, the agent repeated, oblivious to the immense tragic weight of those 4 numbers. "The PIN has been changed and the card is now secured, Mr. Thomas. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No," I said. "That's everything." I hung up the phone. It was done. I had not just changed a password. I had built a wall, a wall of memory, of consequence. To access the account now, she would not just need a number. She would have to confront the ghost she had spent her adult life running from. She would have to type the date of her mother's death, the very day she had chosen a new handbag over a final goodbye. The very act of accessing the money would be an admission of her original sin. It was a perfect, poetic, and exquisitely cruel trap. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, and for the first time I allowed myself to think back to that terrible day, to the part of the story I had buried even from myself. After I had found her at the mall, after the screaming and the accusations, after I had dragged her to the hospital to see her mother's still, silent form, we had returned home to a house that was thick with the silence of death. She had fled to her room, and I had been left alone with my grief. Later that night, I had gone to speak to her, to try and bridge the impossible chasm that had just opened between us. I found her not crying, not grieving, but on the phone, her voice a low, excited whisper. She was talking to a friend, and she was describing in breathless, giddy detail the new dress she had bought. I didn't say a word. I just backed away from the door, and in that moment, something inside me broke. The love a father has for his daughter is a powerful, resilient thing. But that night, I learned it is not indestructible. I learned that some betrayals are so profound. They burn away the very foundations of love, leaving only the cold, hard bedrock of duty. For 15 years, I had done my duty. I had supported her, enabled her, protected her from the consequences of that day. But no more. The firefighter in me knew that some fires cannot be extinguished. They must be allowed to burn themselves out. My daughter had spent her life running from the heat of her own choices. Now she was about to find herself trapped in the flames. And this time, I would not be coming to rescue her. For the first few weeks, Jessica lived in a blissful, self-imposed ignorance. She was riding the high of her successful heist, flaunting her new wardrobe and treating her friends to extravagant dinners. She was, for a brief, shining moment, the woman she had always wanted to be, a woman of effortless wealth and sophisticated taste. The $20,000 debt she had accrued was a distant, abstract concept, a problem for another day, a bill she was supremely confident her father would quietly, inevitably handle. He always did. My own life, in contrast, became a fortress of silence. I did not call her. I did not text. I did not respond to the single breezy voicemail she left me a few days after her shopping spree. A message filled with a vague, dismissive, "Thank you for helping out, Dad. You're a lifesaver," followed by a detailed account of her wonderful day in the city. I simply disappeared from her life. My silence was a new and unsettling variable in her predictable world, but one she was too self-absorbed to truly analyze. The first tremor in her perfect world arrived in the form of a crisp, white envelope from Sterling National Bank. It was the first credit card statement. She opened it, glanced at the staggering 5-figure balance, and tossed it onto her mail pile with a dismissive shrug. It was my name on the account after all, my responsibility. But then the phone calls began. At first they were polite, automated, reminders. She ignored them. Then they became more frequent, more insistent, calls from real people in the collections department. "Good morning. I'm calling on behalf of Sterling Bank regarding account number ending in 4242. A cheerful voice would begin. "You need to speak to the primary account holder, Thomas," she would say, her voice dripping with annoyed impatience before hanging up. She believed it was that simple. She had always been a passenger in the financial vehicle of her life. She had no idea how the engine actually worked. She didn't understand that as an authorized user who had made the charges, she was also legally liable for the debt. A month after her shopping spree, the second, more significant tremor hit. She was at a high-end boutique, attempting to buy a new pair of shoes when her own personal credit card was declined. "I'm so sorry, Miss Jessica," the young sales clerk said, her face a picture of embarrassment. "It says, payment refused." Jessica flushed, a hot, angry red. She tried another card. The same result. Flustered and humiliated, she called her own. "Bank from the street corner." "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded of the customer service agent. "I have plenty of credit available." "Yes, ma'am, you do," the agent replied calmly. However, a delinquency report was filed this morning by Sterling National Bank. "It seems you are a co-signer on an account with a significant overdue balance. Your credit score has been substantially impacted. All your lines of credit have been temporarily frozen pending a resolution. Credit score. Delinquency report." These were concepts from a world she had never had to worry about. For the first time, a flicker of real, cold fear pierced through her bubble of entitlement. The consequences of her actions were no longer an abstract problem for her father to solve. They were beginning to directly affect her own curated lifestyle. That was when she finally came to me. She stormed into my quiet, peaceful house without knocking, her face a thunderous mask of indignation. She was not there to apologize. She was there to demand. "What have you done?" she shouted, throwing a handful of angry-looking letters from the bank onto my kitchen table. "They've frozen my accounts. They've ruined my credit. All because you haven't paid this stupid bill." I looked up from the book I was reading, my expression calm. "That is not my bill, Jessica," I said quietly. "It is yours. You spent the money. You are responsible for the debt." She stared at me, her mouth agape, as if I had just started speaking in a foreign language. The concept was utterly alien to her. But you're the primary account holder," she stammered. "You're my father. You're supposed to take care of things like this." "No, Jessica," I replied, my voice still quiet, but with an underlying firmness she had never heard from me before. "I am your father. I am not your bank. My responsibility was to raise you, to teach you right from wrong. Your responsibility is to live as an adult and to pay for your own choices." "I can't pay for it," she cried, the anger now shifting to a more familiar, manipulative panic. "I don't have $20,000. You know that. Are you trying to ruin my life?" "The life you have built," I said, my gaze unwavering, "is built on a foundation of my money and your lies. A structure built on such a weak foundation is bound to collapse eventually. I am simply no longer willing to prop it up." She stared at me, her mind clearly struggling to process this new, unyielding version of her father. She had come here expecting me to crumble, to apologize, to immediately call the bank and fix her problem. She was expecting the enabler, the safety net, the man who had always chosen her comfort over his own principles. She was not prepared for the firefighter, the man who knew that sometimes the only way to save a structure is to let the rotten parts burn away. Jessica left my house that day in a storm of furious, frustrated tears. She couldn't comprehend what had happened. It was as if a fundamental law of her universe, the law that her father would always fix everything, had been broken. But I knew this was just the beginning. The pressure I had applied was financial. The real lesson was yet to come. In the weeks that followed, her situation deteriorated exactly as I had predicted. The friends who had flocked to her during her brief, credit-fueled reign as a society benefactor disappeared the moment she could no longer pick up the check. Her landlord, seeing the negative mark on her credit report, refused to renew the lease on her expensive apartment. She was forced to sell the luxury car she could no longer afford the payments for. The carefully constructed facade of her life, the one she had showcased so proudly on social media, was crumbling, brick by expensive, ill-gotten brick. She tried everything to avoid the inevitable. She attempted to take out personal loans, only to be rejected due to her ruined credit. She tried to sell some of the designer goods she had bought, only to discover their resale value was a fraction of what she had paid. For the first time in her 30 years of life, she was experiencing a real, tangible consequence from which I was not shielding her. She called me, of course. The calls were a masterclass in the escalating stages of manipulative grief. First came the angry, accusatory calls, where she blamed me for ruining her life. I did not engage. I simply listened. Then came the tearful, pleading calls, where she promised she had learned her lesson and begged me to just make it all go away, just this one last time. I did not relent. Finally, about 2 months into this war of attrition, the call I had been waiting for arrived. It came late at night. Her voice was not angry, not tearful. It was hollow, defeated. "Dad," she said, her voice a quiet, broken whisper. I'm going to be evicted. I have nowhere to go. Ben and we have nowhere to go." The mention of my grandson was a deliberate, final arrow aimed at my heart, and it hit its mark. The thought of Ben, my innocent grandson, being caught in the fallout of his mother's mistakes was a pain I could barely endure. But the firefighter in me knew this was the most dangerous moment. This was the moment of emotional blackmail, the moment to hold the line. "That is a terrible situation, Jessica," I said, my voice calm and even, betraying none of the turmoil within me. "A true emergency." "Please, Dad," she whispered. "I know I messed up, but please don't punish Ben for my mistakes." "I have no intention of punishing Ben," I replied. "And I am not punishing you, Jessica. I am simply allowing you to feel the full weight of your own choices. However," and here I paused, setting the hook of my trap, I am not without compassion. There is a solution to your problem. A way for you to pay off the entire debt and fix your credit yourself. There was a flicker of hope in her voice. How? What is it? The emergency card, I said simply. While I am no longer willing to pay the debt for you, the card itself is still active. The funds within it are more than enough to cover the balance. I gave you the card and the PIN. If you truly need it for an emergency, and I believe we can both agree that homelessness qualifies as an emergency, then you have my permission to access it and use it to pay off what you owe. It was a brilliant, cruel, and perfectly logical move. I was not giving her a handout. I was empowering her to solve her own problem using the very tool she had abused. I was giving her the key to her own salvation, knowing full well that that key was also the key to her psychological reckoning. For a moment, she was ecstatic. "Oh, Dad, thank you. Thank you. I knew you wouldn't let us down." She saw a simple, easy solution. She believed the old, soft-hearted father had finally returned. She had no memory, no inkling of the change I had made. "The PIN is the same one I gave you, right?" she asked, a happy, practical tone returning to her voice. "No," I replied, and the line went silent. "I had to change it for security reasons. The bank insisted." "Oh," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "Well, what is it?" This was the moment. The beginning of the real lesson. "I don't remember it off the top of my head, Jessica," I lied, smoothly. "It's a date of historical significance to our family. I'm sure if you think about it, you'll be able to figure it out." I could hear the gears turning in her mind. Historical significance? Like your birthday? Or Mom's? "No," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It's a date that I think you owe your mother an apology for. Think about it, Jessica. The answer will come to you." Before she could ask another question, I hung up. I had given her the puzzle box. Now she would have to be the one to solve it. She would have to sift through the archives of her own life, through the memories she had so carefully buried, to find the key. The money was right there, within her reach. All she had to do was remember. For the next few days, Jessica was a woman obsessed. I could picture her, sitting in her half-packed apartment, a frantic cryptographer trying to break a code she didn't understand. She was armed with what she believed was the solution to all her problems, a magical key, but she couldn't find the right door. Her first attempts, I'm sure, were the obvious ones. She would have sat at her laptop, the bank's login page glowing in the dark, and typed in the dates with a confident flourish. "My birthday, incorrect PIN. Please try again. Her mother's birthday, incorrect PIN. Please try again. Our wedding anniversary, incorrect PIN. Her own birthday, incorrect. Ben's birthday, incorrect." With each failure, her frustration would have mounted. The easy, immediate solution she had been promised was proving to be maddeningly elusive. She would have called the bank, of course, trying to use her charm, her tears, her practiced hysterics on the customer service agents. "My father gave me the card, but he's old and forgetful," she would have lied, her voice a perfect imitation of a distressed daughter. "Can't you just reset it for me?" "I'm sorry, Ms. Jessica," the anonymous, professional voice on the other end would reply, following the strict protocols I had confirmed with the bank manager. "For security reasons, only the primary account holder, Mr. Thomas, can change the PIN." The walls were closing in. The eviction date loomed, a hard, immovable deadline. Her friends, tired of her constant drama and unpaid debts, had stopped answering her calls. She was truly, finally, on her own. She called me again, her voice no longer pleading, but sharp with a renewed, desperate anger. "This is a game to you." "Isn't it?" she hissed. "You're enjoying this. Just give me the number, Dad." "I am not playing a game, Jessica," I replied, my voice a calm, unbreachable wall. I have given you the key. You simply refuse to look at the right door. It is a date of historical significance to our family, a date you owe your mother an apology for. It is not a riddle. It is a memory. I've tried every memory, she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. Every birthday, every anniversary, every holiday. Nothing works. What do you want from me? I want you to stop thinking about celebrations, Jessica, I said, my voice softening, a teacher guiding a struggling student, and start thinking about consequences. I hung up, leaving her with that final cryptic clue. I knew what I was asking of her. It was a cruel thing for a father to do, to force his child to stare into the abyss of her own worst moment. But the firefighter in me knew that sometimes the only way to escape a burning building is to run back through the flames that you yourself have set. She had spent 15 years running away from that fire. Now she had to turn and face it. I can imagine her in the days that followed. The frantic energy giving way to a slow, creeping dread. My words would echo in her mind. A date you owe your mother an apology for. She would have sifted through her life, through the catalog of her smaller betrayals, her lesser lies, searching for the one event, the one moment, so significant that I would choose it as the key. She would have resisted. Her mind would have recoiled from the memory, the same way a hand pulls back from a hot stove. It was a place she had locked away, a door she had bolted shut for a decade and a half. To open it would be to admit a truth about herself that she could not bear to face. That on the most important day, at the most critical moment, she had failed. Utterly. But the eviction notice on her door was a relentless ticking clock. The prospect of being on the street with her son was a fear that was finally greater than the fear of her own past. And so I can picture her, late one night, probably the night before the eviction. The apartment is dark, filled with boxes. Ben is asleep in his room. She is alone, finally stripped of all her distractions, all her excuses. She sits with her phone, the bank app open, and she forces herself to go back. Back 15 years. Back to the hospital. Back to the frantic phone call from her father. Back to the lie she told about the history final. She forces herself to remember the feel of the new dress, the smell of the food court, the giddy, selfish thrill of that shopping spree. And then she forces herself to remember the cold, dead silence of the hospital room, the sight of her mother, still and silent under a white sheet. She forces herself to remember the look in my eyes, not of anger, but of a sorrow so profound it had swallowed all other emotions. She remembers the date. October. Third, her fingers, trembling, would type the numbers into the app. Not 4 digits, but 6. Month, day, year. The final, full, unvarnished truth. 1, 0, 2, 3, and then the year. The year she had tried to erase. The screen would have changed. Not incorrect PIN, but a new message. Authentication successful. Welcome, Jessica. The money, the solution to all her problems, was now hers. But I knew with an absolute heartbreaking certainty that it would bring her no joy. Because in that moment of digital victory, she would be faced with the full, crushing weight of her moral defeat. She hadn't just unlocked an account. She had unlocked the door to a part of her soul she had tried to kill, and its ghost would now haunt her forever. The screen glowed in the darkness of her half-empty apartment. Welcome, Jessica. The words that should have been a triumphant release were, instead, a judgment. The money was there. The solution to her eviction, her debt, her spiraling life was just a few taps away. But she couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She was no longer in her apartment. She was 15 years in the past, standing once again in the cold, sterile silence of that hospital room. The scent of antiseptic, the quiet, rhythmic beep of a machine that had been turned off, the impossible stillness of her mother under a white sheet, It all came rushing back, not as a hazy, suppressed memory, but with a vivid, brutal clarity. She could feel the stiff fabric of the new dress she had bought that day, the leather of the new handbag cutting into her shoulder. Objects she had once seen as trophies now felt like shackles, physical evidence of her crime. The pin was not just a password. It was a mirror. And in it, for the first time, she was forced to see herself not as the victim of circumstance, not as the misunderstood daughter, but as the person she truly was on that day. A selfish, trivial girl who had traded her mother's last moments for a new outfit. The weight of that truth, a truth she had spent half her life outrunning, finally caught up to her, and it was crushing. She didn't transfer the money. She didn't pay the bills. She simply curled up on the floor, surrounded by the cardboard boxes of her life. And she wept. She wept not with the theatrical, manipulative sobs she had perfected over the years, but with the raw, ragged, gut-wrenching grief of a soul that has finally been forced to look at its own ugliness. She was not crying for the life she was about to lose. She was crying for the mother she had never properly mourned. She stayed like that for hours until the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows. The eviction was today. The movers would be there in a few hours. The practical crisis had not gone away, but it was no longer the most important thing in her world. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone. She didn't call the bank. She didn't call the landlord. She called me. I was awake, of course. I had been awake all night, sitting in my quiet kitchen, waiting. I knew the moment she solved the puzzle, the moment the key turned in the lock. I saw the bank notification on my own phone. PIN successfully changed and account accessed. The trap had worked. But as I waited for her call, I felt no sense of victory, only a deep, aching sorrow. When the phone rang, I answered on the first ring. "Dad?" Her voice was a raw, broken whisper, a voice I had not heard since she was a small child who had just woken from a nightmare. "I'm here, Jessica," I said quietly. There was a long silence, filled only with the sound of her ragged breathing. I could hear the sirens of the city in the background of her call, a faint echo of the sirens from that other terrible day. "Why?" she finally whispered. It was not an accusation. It was a genuine, desperate question. "Why that date? Of all the ways you could have punished me, why did you choose that?" This was the moment. The moment the firefighter had to become a father again. I could have been cruel. I could have been vengeful. I could have listed her every sin, her every lie. But I looked at the picture of Mary on my wall, and I knew that was not what she would have wanted. "Because it was the only one that mattered, Jessica," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "The money, the lies, the shopping, all of that was just noise, symptoms of a deeper problem. But that day was the source. It was the moment you chose things over people. It was a choice you made, and you have been running from it ever since. I didn't lock the money behind that date to punish you. I did it because I knew that until you were willing to face that memory, you would never, ever be free." I let the words sink in. I was not just her father. I was her first responder, guiding her through the wreckage of her own life. "I never told you this," I continued, my voice dropping lower. "But I was there that night, after the hospital. I came to your room. I wanted to hold you, to grieve with you. But you were on the phone with a friend. You were laughing. You were describing the new dress you had bought." A choked, horrified sob came from her end of the line. She didn't remember. In her trauma, in her guilt, she had blocked it out completely. "I didn't get angry, Jess," I said, the memory still a sharp pain in my own heart. "I just broke." In that moment, I knew I had lost not just my wife, but my daughter as well. I spent 15 years trying to get her back, buying her things, fixing her problems, hoping that one day the girl I had raised would return. But I was wrong. I wasn't helping you. I was enabling you to keep running. This was the only way I knew to make you finally stop." The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow, a long, keening wail of pure, unadulterated anguish traveled through the phone, the sound of a soul seeing its own reflection for the first time and being horrified by what it saw. The memory, so long and so deeply buried, had been violently exhumed, and she was not prepared for the ugliness of the corpse. "I did that?" she whispered, her voice a fragile, broken thing. I don't remember. Oh, God, Dad, I don't remember." "No, sweetheart," I said, my own voice thick with a sorrow that was 50% for her and 50% for the father who had been forced to carry that terrible secret alone for 15 years. "The mind has a way of protecting us from the truths we cannot bear. But the truth is always there, waiting. It is the foundation upon which the rest of our lives are built. And your foundation, Jessica, was built on a terrible, unacknowledged crack. We were no longer talking about money. We were no longer talking about a credit card. We were talking about a life that had been derailed by a single selfish choice made by a child, a choice that had been allowed to fester, to rot, to poison everything that came after." A loud, insistent knocking sound suddenly echoed through her end of the phone. "Oh, no," she gasped, her voice snapping back to the present, filled with a new, immediate panic. "It's them, the movers, the marshals. Dad, they're here. They're here to put us on the street." This was the final crucible, the final test. She had the money. She had the solution to her practical problem right there on her phone. She could, in this very moment, transfer the funds, show the marshals the proof of payment, and buy herself more time. She could solve the immediate crisis and then retreat back into the comfortable fog of denial, pushing the terrible memory of her mother back down into the darkness where it had lived for so long. Or she could choose a different path. "Dad, what do I do?" she cried, her voice a desperate plea for guidance, the voice of a child once more. And in that moment, I knew I had to do the hardest thing a father can ever do. I had to let her fall. I had to trust that the foundation of love and integrity that Mary and I had tried to build for her in her earliest years was still there, somewhere, buried beneath the rubble of her bad choices. "I cannot answer that for you, Jessica," I said, my voice quiet but firm, a lighthouse in her storm. "You have the money. You can make the problem go away. You can go back to your life. Or you can let it all go. You can let the apartment, the furniture, the life you built on that broken foundation, let it all turn to dust. You can walk out of that apartment with nothing but your son and the truth. It is the hardest choice you will ever have to make. But it is, for the first time in a very long time, your choice." I could hear the muffled sounds of the marshals knocking again, their voices polite but firm. "Ma'am, we have a court order. We need you to open the door." The line was silent. I could feel her, thousands of miles away, standing on the precipice of her own life. On one side was the easy, familiar path of money and denial. On the other, a terrifying, unknown path of truth and consequence. I waited, my heart in my throat. This was a bigger gamble than the house, than the money, than anything else. I was gambling on her soul. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I heard her take a single shuddering breath. "Okay, Dad," she whispered. And it was the bravest sound I had ever heard. "Okay," she said again, stronger this time. "I understand." I heard the sound of her phone being placed on a table. I heard her footsteps as she walked towards the door. I heard the click of the lock as she turned it. And then I heard her voice, clear and steady, speaking not to me but to the men on the other side of the door. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said. "You can come in. We were just leaving." And then she hung up the phone. I sat there in the absolute silence of my kitchen, the dial tone a long, lonely hum in my ear. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know where she would go or how she would survive. But I knew one thing with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. The fire was out. She had finally walked out of the burning building. She had left the lies, the materialism, the ghosts of the past to be consumed by the flames. She was walking out into the cold, harsh light of day with nothing but her son's hand in hers. And for the first time in her adult life, she was truly, finally free. I did not hear from Jessica for 3 months. It was the longest, most difficult silence of my life. I had no idea where she was, if she was safe, if my grandson Ben was okay. Every day was a battle between my hope and my fear. I had to trust that in letting her go, I had given her the only tool she truly needed to survive. The truth. The money, the $20,000, sat untouched in the emergency account. After a week, the bank, following my standing instructions, automatically used the funds to pay off the credit card balance in full. The immediate financial crisis was over, but the real work, the rebuilding of a life and a soul, had only just begun. Then, one day, a letter arrived. It was postmarked from a small, unassuming town in a neighboring state I had never heard of. The handwriting on the envelope was hers, but it was different. Less of a confident scrawl, more of a careful, deliberate script. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Dad," it began. There were no excuses, no justifications. "We are safe. Ben is enrolled in school here. I found a job. It's not glamorous. I'm a waitress at a local diner, the night shift. It's hard work. It's honest work. For the first time in a long time, I sleep at night." She wrote that the first few weeks had been the hardest of her life. They had stayed in shelters, eaten in soup kitchens. She had been forced to see a side of the world she had only ever looked down upon. And in that world, she had found not pity, but a quiet, resilient dignity she had never known. She wrote about Ben, about how he had adapted with a child's simple courage, never once complaining. He was her reason, she said, her true north. The letter ended not with a request for money, but with a simple, devastating question. "The money on that card, is it still there?" I knew this was the real test, not for her, but for me. My answer would define the future of our relationship. I could have said no. I could have closed the account, taken back the safety net, and forced her to continue on, her own. But I thought of Mary, and I thought of the promise I had made to her, to not let our daughter forget where she came from. I wrote back. "Yes, Jessica," I wrote. "The money is still there. It will always be there. It is, and always has, been, for a true emergency. It seems you have finally learned what that means." That letter opened a small, fragile bridge between us. We began to write, exchanging letters every few weeks. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the present. I told her about my garden, about the books I was reading. She told me about her job, about a funny customer at the diner, about a drawing Ben had made in school. We were not trying to rebuild the old broken relationship. We were slowly, carefully, building a new one honest word at a time. A year after she had left, on a crisp autumn day, I drove to her town. I found her in that small diner. She was wearing an apron, her hair tied back simply, a faint tiredness. In her eyes that was offset by a new, quiet strength. When she saw me sitting in a booth, she didn't cry. She just smiled, a real, genuine smile, the first one I had seen from her in over a decade. She sat down opposite me after her shift was over. We didn't need to say the words, "I'm sorry," or "I forgive you." They were present in the quiet, comfortable silence between us. "Ben is playing in the park across the street," she said. "He'd love to see you." We walked to the park, and I watched. My grandson, happy and healthy, playing on the swings. He ran to me, hugging me with a child's simple, uncomplicated love. As we sat on the park bench watching him play, Jessica finally spoke the words that I knew had been weighing on her heart. "That day, Dad," she said, her eyes on her son, "the day Mom died, I was so scared. I didn't know how to handle it. So I ran. I ran to the one place that made me feel safe, that made me feel like I was in control, a shopping mall. It was a cowardly thing to do. It was a cruel thing to do, and I have lived with the ghost of it every single day since." "I know," I said quietly, placing my hand over hers. "The pin," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "It was a terrible, beautiful thing to do. You didn't just punish me. You set me free. You forced me to finally face the ghost. Thank you." We sat there for a long time, a father and a daughter, no longer defined by a shared trauma, but by a shared, hard-won peace. The firefighter in me had spent a lifetime running into burning buildings to save strangers. It had taken me 15 years to learn the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the only way to save the person you love most is to give them the courage to run back into their own fire and the trust that they will find their own way out. The emergency was over. We were finally, all of us, safe. If this story of forgiveness, consequence, and the true meaning of family has moved you, please show your support by liking and sharing this video. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the difficult and ultimately rewarding journey of the human heart. Thank you for watching.